the heart of this book is a listing of 47 plants and their uses. And this part of the book goes through each plant. It lists its scientific name, several variants of the Kumeyaay name, whichever variants I could find from Ipai and Tipai. And then the English and Spanish common names. I'd also like to mention that I had a lot of important help on this part from Diana Lindsay, who is in her own right quite an ethnobotanist and has published quite a bit on ethnobotany, is really an expert. And she also steered me towards some great resources from the San Diego Natural History Museum that helped me as an anthropologist try to get what at the time were the most up-to-date scientific names that we could. Of course, all of this is changing almost daily with the new science of genetics, changing everything we understand about plants. But I really appreciate that help from Diana. So with each one of these plants, we look at what the plant, we describe the plant physically, and then we also, I also try to go through any kind of harvesting techniques that the gatherers could tell me about, or anything that I could find through the literature from other California Native people. And from the wonderful book called Tending the Wild from Kat Anderson, I found that gatherers who like to gather the corms of the blue dix, which is what this plant is commonly called, Diplostoma, are very careful to just gather the largest bulbs, leave the smaller ones, which they call the babies. They detach those, leave them there, cover it back up with dirt. And when it rains again, there's a little funnel that takes the water down to where those babies are. And where you had one plant, next year you'll have a whole bunch of plants. So imagine that process times 1,000 people doing that, times thousands of years. This is one of the ways that Native people have shaped the environment where we live, that we often think is just a wild environment, but in many ways there's very much a strong footprint and handprint of Native people using these plant resources in many ways over the years. Another favorite plant for many Native people in this gorgeous photograph from Deborah Small is the what's called lizard's tail, or yerba mansa, yerba del manso. This is a plant that grows in wetlands, and the rhizomes of this plant are medicinal. The leaves, the flowers, they're all medicinal. It's a very strong kind of tonic and natural antiseptic. So, and this is also one that people can actually pick up and move around. And so some anthropologists believe that the natural extension of this has been extended by humans picking it up and moving it outside of the area where it might have naturally grown. It's many of these plants, like yerba mansa, grow very well in your gardens. And I highly encourage people to patronize their native plant nurseries in the area where they live, and rather than foraging from the wild. But unless you're a native person who really knows how to do that correctly, I'd strongly encourage people to try to grow many of these plants in their own yards, and to not try to affect native populations. So, and besides everything else, it's very handy to have it right here in your yard, and they're beautiful plants. So this is Thistle Sage in Baja California. It's called chia. It's one of the types of chia. This is the chia that is more well-known and more commonly used in Baja California. It takes quite a bit of work to gather the little tiny chia seeds, but as we know, today it's considered a superfood, and Native people knew that long before it became, it got that designation, but people knew that they could gather this, and it's a very concentrated, nutritious kind of food that people could carry with them for long trips. Chia is also one of those plants that grows more prolifically after a fire. So I don't really have time to go into all the ways that native people were using fire management in their landscapes, but many of the people I talked to mentioned that they would especially look for chia after fires because it grows so prolifically. And chia can be lightly toasted and then made into a delicious drink. It's toasted, ground a little bit, and made into a beautiful drink. And here is Cecilia Adams from Nahi is showing us how she grinds on a grinding stone. Another wonderful plant for your gardens and a favorite plant among many Kumeyaay in Baja California for eating is Bladder Pod. I guess it's popular with ants also, as we can see here. Here, Yolanda Mesa and her sister Norma are gathering the buds of the Bladder Pod, and those buds then get cooked, and they have to throw the water off several times because it's very bitter, but eventually you get a delicious vegetable that tastes kind of like cooked cabbage, and you can make little tacos out of that. They're very filling. You eat a few of these and that keeps you going all day long. They're quite delicious. Another food that I really knew nothing about until people started telling me about how important it was for them is the holly leaf cherry. And not only can you eat the beautiful cherries, but you can, which you see here, which can be gathered, and there's a kind of a thin skin, but it's quite edible. And then you can also dry them and crack them open and get the kernel out from inside and process that. Now, there's a little disclaimer here. You have to really know what you're doing. And many of the native plant specialists told me people need to not just jump into this lightly. You need to really know what you're doing, because this is a plant, like many, that has substances that can be toxic or even deadly. This one has cyanide in it, and yet the cyanide is water soluble. So if you know how to process it by pouring lukewarm water through it several times, you can remove the cyanide and make a delicious atole, or kind of a mush that looks something like this. And I particularly like the holly leaf or Islaya cherry pudding because it has sort of an almond flavor to it. Manzanita, which many of us know because they're such beautiful bushes, beautiful plants for landscapes. They can also be used to make a drink. They have to be soaked and softened up, and then the hard seeds removed, and then again ground and added to water, maybe with a little bit of honey, and you get a nice, it's called Manzanita cider. Now, I just wanted to mention a few more plants. Many of us know the laurel sumac. This grows throughout Southern California, Northern Baja California. Laurel sumac is a plant that's considered a woman's medicine. It has a very strong effect on a woman's reproductive system. It causes uterine contractions. So again, it's not to be used lightly, but many of the women in Baja California mention this as something that could be used in childbirth if a woman was having problems with childbirth, to help induce labor, or to help make sure that all of the placentas come down after childbirth. So again, it needs to be used very carefully and with somebody who knows what they're doing. But we can see that, as Doña Teodora used to say, she would point out to the hills and say, "That's my pharmacy. Everything I need is out there." So this many thousands of years of people interacting with this environment, with these environments, has allowed them to get everything they need from those environments. On the desert side, we have the beautiful and majestic California fan palm. But did you know that these nice little seeds can also be used to make something like molasses. It's a wonderful kind of a drink that's nice and sweet and earthy flavored. This was important for people from the Cahuilla all the way down into wherever this grows, down into Baja California. The Toyon, which also grows throughout our region, a wonderful plant also to grow in your gardens. Right this time of year, it's starting to get these beautiful berries, hence its name Christmas berry, along with Toyon. And these berries can be eaten, but there's a special way that you have to do that. They're very astringent unless you know how to kind of heat them up and process them to take that astringency out. And like many plants, there are stories that go along with the plant itself that are important for people to know. For example, when you're gathering the Toyon, you need to do it quietly. Children need to not be making a lot of noise or yelling. It needs to be done in sort of a quiet way. When I asked about that, it was explained to me that in part that's because you don't want to scare the bush itself. It might sort of retract something from the berries themselves. So we have so much to learn from people who know so much about these plants. Another plant that we often take for granted that grows throughout our region is California sagebrush. Not a true sage, it's an artemisia, but also a wonderful plant that's got natural antiseptic qualities. And in my book, there's a fascinating story told by Melindra. She's one of the basket weavers. I can't remember her name right now, but she talks about how she had a tick in her ear and how her mother made a beautiful, she made a drink or an extract out of this to get that tick out of her ear. It made the tick come charging out of her ear. Another plant that we see a lot is called mule fat. And that's the stalks of that are used to make the shafts for arrows. And Teodora used to tell me, you should make a tea out of this and put it on your head. It'll make your hair grow. Obviously, I didn't do it, so maybe I need to start doing that. And here we can see the shafts from the mule fat, nice and straight, long and straight.